the topic of our talk is sleep and brain health. Um, what we're going to do today is we're going to spend time talking about sleep. We're going to be talking about its connection to brain health, and we're going to be talking about why it's important and some tips that you can do. I have a lot of information I'm going to give you, but please stay with me because I'm going to be giving you tips along the way. And at the end, I'm going to provide a summary slide of all those tips, and then we can base our questions and answers off that or anything else that you want to discuss. Um, um, my heritage, I'm Hawaiian and Italian, so I have to say that because my hands will be moving constantly. I think that's more the Italian side of me, and I just don't even recognize it even when I'm talking into a camera. So just apologies from the beginning. So what are we going to talk about? First, we're going to talk about what does sleep mean? We're going to move into why sleep matters for health and especially for our brain health. Talk about what does healthy sleep look like or should look like. Then we're going to really get into the nuts and bolts of tips for quality sleep and exploring relaxation and mindfulness techniques for reducing stress and improving sleep. Before we really dive into this, I want you to just ponder a question for a moment. And actually throughout, I'm going to have a number of questions that we won't speak to them out loud right now, but just for your thinking as you think about your sleep and moving forward with what changes you may want to make. So the first set of questions to just think about is, what does restoration mean to you? What does rest mean? How and what do you do to restore yourself, to make yourself feel like you, to give you energy to tackle the day? So just ponder that for a moment. As we think about restoration, for the purpose of our time together today, we're going to talk about restoration in regards to its relationship with sleep. So restoration and replenishment of expended energy through sleep, and then how that connects to our brain health and physical functioning. You'll see here on the right hand of that slide a number of different areas that we would look to for restoration. Our focus today is sleep, but we're actually going to touch a little bit on most of these areas as well and how they connect to sleep. If we were to do a talk on each of these areas, each one would have to take at least an hour or more to give it its due diligence, but we're going to touch a little bit on each one and how it connects to sleep. So I mentioned questions. So here's another question for us. How are you sleeping now? What does your sleep look like? What type of sleep and how much sleep do you need personally to feel your best? And do you usually get that amount of sleep on a typical night? If you don't get that amount of sleep that you need, or you don't feel rested, what's getting in your way of getting enough sleep or quality sleep? And then what changes have you noticed that might be impacting your sleep? So we'll come back to that, but think about that. So let's talk about kind of what we should be getting for sleep. So how does your sleep compare? We know from data that 1 in 3 US adults gets less than 7 hours of sleep a night. So we know from research that the ideal number of sleep is probably 7 to 8 hours. There really is no magical number. It's individual, but that's what we know on average people need to feel rested and rejuvenated. And we'll talk about how that time affects our health and brain health. We also know from research that 50% of adults often wake feeling unrefreshed, feel tired. 50 to 70 million persons in the US currently suffer from some type of sleep deprivation or sleep disorder. And 9 million people are using sleeping pills on a regular basis. What I'd like to work with you today on is non-pharmacological or things we can do that don't involve taking medicine. There's a place for medicine, and I'm not going to say whether medicine is good or bad or whether you should or shouldn't take medicine, but focus on things that we can do that don't involve medicine to improve our sleep. So, why sleep matters. Why do we really need sleep? What is it other than just feeling better and feeling rejuvenated, what does sleep why does sleep matter? So what happens, in order to answer that question, we need to really delve into what happens when we don't get enough sleep. Well, we know from the research that if those of us, and when we don't get enough sleep, it puts us at increased risk for heart disease, diabetes, and depression. Those are the three main things that it puts us at risk for. So not only if we do have one of those three things, does it exacerbate it and make it worse, but if we don't have those, it makes us at greater risk for actually having heart disease, diabetes, and depression. We also know that when we don't get enough sleep, we have increased hunger. The thought is that we might try to balance our tiredness or fatigue with food, so it's increased hunger. The other thing that happens, and speaking more to brain health, is there's impaired decision-making skills. So it actually does affect our brain when we don't get enough sleep. Other pieces, and to delve more specifically into that, is when we don't get enough sleep, it impacts our immune system, and which makes sense because if we're tired and we're not getting enough sleep, our body doesn't have the opportunity to rejuvenate, which builds our immune system. Without enough sleep, we have impaired memory. Actually, the impairment in our memory and concentration is the same if we have decreased sleep over time. It's the same as if we would stay awake for 48 hours straight. So if you think about that, just over time, a lack of sleep decreases our concentration and impairs our memory. The good news is that we can get those things back with greater sleep, but the longer we continue with poor sleep, the harder it is to get that back. We also have chronic fatigue, so more than just feeling tired, but actually chronic fatigue that's harder to get out of. Irritability, which I'm sure we've all experienced when we're tired, and then obesity as well. A lack of sleep actually also increases or contributes to a hormone imbalance. So when we have a lack of sleep, we have actually hormones in our body that contribute to our appetite. And so when we're getting a lack of sleep, our body is then trying to make up for that sleep to give us energy. Our first inclination is to eat to give us energy. And it makes sense because our body is actually secreting this appetite hormone that tells us we need to eat to make up for that energy. What happens then, we overeat and we have weight gain. And that is actually then a vicious cycle where lack of sleep, appetite hormone released, overeating, and then we go back again. And it just keeps continuing. And the net result is weight gain, which contributes to a lot of other health conditions. So now that we've talked a little bit about why sleep's important and what are some of the things that happen with sleep when we're not getting enough sleep, now let's look at kind of what is the amount of sleep that we need. So this chart shows by age group, and this is from the CDC, what the recommended hours of sleep are per night. So not surprising, when we're younger, we need more sleep as our bodies develop and we're growing. This is especially true in our younger years and especially adolescence when we have a lot of growth period and our brains are developing. And then over time, that sleep begins to change. But you can see that basically from the time we reach adulthood of 18 years and above, we need about 7+ hours of sleep. So that's the target. That's on average what we need. And again, it's individualized. Some people do very well with less sleep. Some people need more sleep, but that's kind of the average that we know we need to reach restfulness and rejuvenation and health, both physical and our brain health. So thinking about that and our sleep, let's talk about what is sleep and what our body goes through during the sleep process. So I'm sure most of, if not all of you, are aware of the stages of sleep and the sleep cycle, but I wanted to go over that as a review. So there's 4 stages of sleep, and it starts from light to deep sleep. In stage 1, it's the light sleep. Our body is transitioning between wake and sleep. We are actually not getting any physical or brain health benefit during the light stages of sleep, but it's the time when our body is starting to relax and prepare for rejuvenation. As we move into the second stage of sleep, the deeper stage, that's when there's greater relaxation of the body. So if you think about if you had a camera on you during the night when you're sleeping, stage 1, your body's probably moving around a little bit. And even if you are sleeping, you're trying to find that comfortable position. As you move into stage 2 and you have that greater relaxation, you probably found that comfortable position and your brain starts to relax a little more. As we move out of stage 2 into stage 3 and 4, that's that deep sleep, and that's the restorative sleep. So that's the sleep where our body is rejuvenating, our brain is healing. So we actually move throughout these stages, and REM, or rapid eye movement sleep, is where we tend to have a lot of our dreams. We move throughout the night. And on a typical night with ideal sleep, we probably go through 4 to 6 cycles of these 4 stages of sleep. As the night turns into morning, we are spending less time in stages 3 and 4 and more in 1 and 2. So it's the earlier part of our night of sleeping, or our sleep time, where we're getting the most time in that deeper, more restorative sleep in those earlier phases. And then it just becomes more in stages 1 and 2 as we prepare to wake up from sleep. So what happens during sleep? Well, our metabolism slows. So as our metabolism slows, our body prepares for restfulness. With our metabolism slowing, we have a harder time processing the foods that we've eaten. Hence why it's not a good idea to eat heavy just before we go to bed and attempt to go to sleep. Our brain during this time actually starts to flush out waste. Our body is sleeping, our organs are slowing down. Our brain actually doesn't really sleep. It's important for brain rejuvenation, but our brain is actually working the entire time that we're sleeping, and it flushes out waste. There's some research that's been shown that part of this waste might be some of the byproducts that could reduce our risk for Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. Again, preliminary evidence, but there's some thought to that. During this time of sleep, our organs and muscles repair themselves. And then we also have growth hormone that's secreted. So yes, I know none of us are still growing, or at least not in the direction that we want to grow. But we're still releasing a growth hormone. And this is important because it's that growth hormone that allows our organs and muscles to repair themselves during the sleep process. So, benefits of sleep. Well, heart health, not surprisingly, because heart problems are a risk if we're not getting enough sleep. So, our heart health, with better sleep, we're able to decrease stress hormones that lead to inflammation. Other sleep benefits: better concentration and improved memory with better sleep, as our body is healing and our brain is able to get rid of that excess waste. Weight maintenance, which makes sense. We actually continue to burn calories as we're sleeping. So not only activity is important in weight maintenance and management, but as we're sleeping, we're continuing to burn calories. So we want to have good sleep to continue to process the foods that we're eating during the day. Lower risk of depression. Again, that has to do with how we're feeling, but also impact the serotonin in our brains. And then reduce levels of stress, because much of stress, if we talk about another cycle that's not a good cycle, and sleep is very much connected. That if we're not getting enough sleep, we're stressed. If we're stressed, that's keeping us from getting enough sleep. And it becomes this vicious cycle. And then lastly, improved immune function. So circadian rhythm, and how does this connect with our sleep? Our body basically is on a sleep cycle all the way, a sleep-wake cycle all the way through the day. This slide shows kind of what our body is doing when we're awake and when we're asleep. So basically from 6 a.m. to noon, this is when our body is at its highest alertness. And we're actually releasing testosterone. This is when probably in terms of brain functioning, we're at our best during this time. We're most alert. From noon to 6, this is when our body is physically at its best. So we have the greatest cardiovascular strength. This is when we have our fastest reaction times and best coordination in terms of physical activity. And then from 6 to midnight, this is when your body reaches its highest body temperature and blood pressure before bed. So your body increases everything throughout the day, blood pressure, body temperature, and then begins to get to the highest level before you actually go to sleep and start to rest. So let's talk about some of the common sleep issues. So one is insomnia, which is a very common sleep disorder. So symptoms might include lying awake for a long time before you fall asleep, sleeping only for short periods of time, being awake for much of the night, sleeping but feeling tired as if you haven't slept at all, or just waking up too early from sleep. Other common sleep issues are sleep apnea, which is basically where there are points during the night where we stop breathing, and these can last for split seconds to a few seconds to even a minute or more at a time. And then we have restless legs syndrome, which is involuntary movement of one's legs while they're sleeping. All of these are considered medical conditions and should consult a doctor about that. Sleep apnea and restless leg syndrome are areas that are harder to target in terms of behavioral or non-pharmacological interventions, whereas insomnia is something that we can target in terms of our own actions and what we're doing. So let's talk about insomnia specifically, or sleep problems that you're having. So why do we have insomnia or sleep problems? So I don't want us to get hung up on insomnia and sleep problems and what's the difference. The fact of the matter is insomnia is basically any trouble we're having with sleep. So we look at this model, Spielman's 3P model of insomnia, which basically looks at 3 factors that contribute to our sleep problems. The first is predisposing factors. So those are things that we have no control of that are either a product of time or that we're born with. So chronic conditions that we might have, especially those that are hereditary, age, being female is actually a predisposing factor to having insomnia. So those are the types of things. They're predisposing, and that's just what we have. Precipitating factors are life events that happen. We have no control over, we cannot change them. But there are things that could have happened in our lives that have made our sleep worse. So thinking about things like divorce, the birth of a child, the death of a loved one, retirement, changing of jobs. So things that might have happened over time that precipitated our sleep problems. Again, we can't change those. They happened, and now we have sleep problems. The last one is one we're going to focus on for the rest of our time, is perpetuating factors. Those are the things that we do that make our sleep better or worse. And most often we're talking about perpetuating factors. They're things that we do that we think are going to help with sleep, but actually are making them worse. So let's talk about what are some of those things that we need to be aware of in terms of having a more restful sleep. Well, not surprisingly, alcohol, not a good remedy for sleep. Although it might make us sleep initially, it's actually a stimulant, as is tobacco, either through smoking or chewing or other forms of tobacco. Caffeine is something that can hinder sleep. Basically, the recommendation is we probably shouldn't have any caffeine after about 11 a.m. Anytime after that, and again, everybody's body processes foods and drinks individually and differently, but that's kind of the time where we're on the cusp of the caffeine possibly impacting our sleep. And then lastly, as you see this this gentleman in the bottom right-hand corner, stress. So what is it that's happening in our lives that are contributing to our sleep? So what should we do about this? That's a lot of problems. What can we do going forward? So let's talk about lifestyle tips for better sleep. So these are the things we're going to talk about right now. Blue light filters and light, regular meals, relaxation, exercise, smoke-free living. Basically, smoking and nicotine cause sleep problems and contribute to the perpetuating of it. And then lastly, our sleep routines. So let's first talk about light and blue light filters and what that means and why it's important. First of all, and not surprisingly, light is so important to our sleep. Those of us who live in the Northwest or in other areas where we go from 6 or 7 hours of light during the day to the spring and then summer where we have light until 10 o'clock at night, we notice a difference in our functioning, right? What we want from light is we want to get exposure to daytime light every day. Now, we might think, oh my gosh, we have cloud coverings for months or weeks or months out of the year. It's okay. Even if we're outside when there's cloud covering, we're still getting vitamin D, which contributes to our sleep from the sun. So we want to make sure that we're getting exposure to daytime bright light. Sit by the window where the sun, even if it's behind the clouds, is coming in, and you'll get daytime exposure. The other thing that we want to do is getting the light right. So electronics, unfortunately, contribute to our sleep problems. We want to turn off our electronics 2 to 3 hours before bed. Now, if we were to have a show of hands or vote, how many of us take our devices to bed, maybe our phone or our iPad or something else, or using it right up until the time of bed? Most of us are probably guilty of that, myself included at times, but it does impact our sleep. So if we must use electronics, we should really use the blue light filter app or function on our electronics. There's apps for that. There's also settings on most of our computers, phones, and tablets. So look into that, lower the light, and try as much as you can not to use your device just before bed, and especially in bed. And we're going to come back to that in a moment.
David, just to interrupt, you have 5 minutes, 5-minute warning.
Thank you. Other things that we can do is relaxation. So some things we can do is journaling, and I'm not saying journaling in the way of journaling your entire day, but writing down things that you might be concerned about so that we can then let them go for the night, or things that might worry you. Aromatherapy, drinking herbal tea. Actually, research has shown that chamomile or sleepy time tea can help with sleep. And then meditation as well. And there's a lot of apps and things on YouTube that you can do for meditation. Regular meals. So spreading out nutrients throughout the day. Eat shortly after waking. And again, that establishes our metabolism. And then not going to food for energy, especially caffeine, because we'll feel worse and it'll affect our sleep. We also want to especially make sure we're getting enough hydration, enough fluids, and then incorporating sleep-promoting foods into our diet, especially our snacks. So fish, whole grains, yogurt, tart cherry juice actually is a sleep-promoting food as well. Other things that we can do, exercise. So I don't have to go off on this because we've all heard it that we need to exercise. Exercise is important for our overall physical health and our brain health, and it also contributes to sleep. And it makes sense because the more tired we are physically from exercise, the better our sleep is. So our aim is to get about 150 minutes per week, or at least 3 days of at least 20 minutes of moderate intensity exercise. And again, that's exercise where we're building our heart rate up. So a brisk walk, marching, even if you were to march in place as you're sitting down, just moving your legs and your feet up and down right now as I'm talking, that's a great exercise as well. So then lastly, let's talk about our sleep routine and developing a plan for sleep. So in order to develop a sleep routine, we need to ask ourselves, what activities are relaxing for sleep? What amount of sleep do we need? And what time would you need to start your routine to make sleep? With that, we want to make sleep a priority. And I'm actually just going to skip ahead to my last slide here so we can go over the tips for sleep before we have our Q&A period. So what can we do for sleep? Reduce light at night. Even that slight light that comes through our shade from the street lamp can affect our sleep, or leaving the bathroom light on. If we roll over and that light catches our eyes, it will wake us up and bring us out of sleep. Increase light during the day. So important. Be outside if you can, or at least sit by a window with exposure to light. Open those curtains and blinds. Exercise daily. No TV or blue light after bedtime. Honestly, TVs in the room, in your bedroom, are one of the worst things that we can do for sleep, because that light is telling our bodies that it's time to be awake, even though it's nighttime. Avoiding caffeine and alcohol. Naps. So let's talk about naps just really quickly. Basically, naps should be 20 to 30 minutes, and they shouldn't happen after 1 p.m. We cannot make up lost sleep. It is impossible. If we nap later in the day or longer than 30 minutes, we're not making up for lost sleep. We're actually stealing from the next night's sleep. So then you're going to continue to be tired. Other things, keeping a regular bed and rising time. So important in terms of consistency. When we're starting out with changing our sleep patterns, it's very important to set a regular rising time and then to work backwards from there for sleep. Some of us have pets. Our pets like to sleep with us. They actually distract and impair our sleep. So keeping pets out of the room if at all possible. Making sure our rooms are comfortable. So we have a comfortable bed, pillow, it's not too warm, and that we have a comfortable sleeping environment. So lastly, you can do this. Give it time. Sleep, our sleep didn't get worse overnight, and it's not going to get better immediately either. But the important thing when we're making changes to our sleep is to make a plan and stick to it and give it time in the process. Thank you.